Before we jump in, a quick note of who's behind this podcast. Imagine this. You're about to close this massive deal. You've been grinding for it. You're pumped. And then your customer's legal team decides to make things interesting. What happens if you get hacked? How do you protect your data? And then your brain just goes blank. That's the nightmare founders deal with all the time. That's actually what YSecurity solves, the sponsor of today's show. There are 40 plus security engineers who've actually done security at Apple, Uber, Microsoft, Robinhood, Brex, and so many more. And get this, you don't hire them, you rent them by the hour. No massive salaries, no expensive consultants, just real experts embedded in your company helping you get SOC 2, ISO, HIPAA, whatever it is that you need to close that big deal. Set a monthly cap, know exactly what you're spending, and close the deal. Head to ysecurity.io/startups and book your free strategy call. Your first 8 hours are free. 40 engineers, 1 full working day, totally free. Go take it. ysecurity.io/startups. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Security Podcast of Silicon Valley. I'm your host, John McLaughlin. I'm joined today with two very special, amazing guests. Stephen and Jacob, welcome. The co-founders of Talbot West.
It's great to be here.
No, thanks for joining. Would you like to share with us and all of our listeners, what do you guys do at Talbot West?
Yeah, thanks, John. Talbot West is an AI-first digital transformation company. So what I mean by that is we do business process consulting, but with an AI native focus. So if you can picture a Venn diagram of two overlapping circles, one is your traditional business process consulting, deep understanding of business systems and processes, and then the other is like the AI expertise. And often these two circles don't overlap. They're two different skill sets, and we sit right at the intersection and kind of bring both to bear to help companies modernize and adopt technology. Would you add anything to that, Steve?
I mean, I think that's a really good kind of overview of the bridge between the technical and the business. I'm sure we'll get more into it.
Right. Thank you so much for that.
Jacob was giving me a little bit of background, but you guys co-founded this company?
Yeah, so Sasha and myself, we co-founded YSecurity together maybe 2 years ago. We just used it as a vehicle to start helping folks in our network, amazing people out there starting companies. Needed a little bit of security help, but it made absolutely no business sense to hire even just one person full-time. And so we could step in and we could provide some of that guidance, some of that leadership, some of that where that rubber hits the road just really early in a company's life cycle before, usually you even hire your first security person. And then word got around that we were doing this and it kind of took off. Here we are, 2 years later, 35 folks on the team. It's kind of like a VC, but we bring with us an entire team of experts who can jump in on an on-demand basis and help.
I can really see the niche that filled because, working for Oracle when security was paramount, but, these are $1 million contracts with Fortune 500 companies. Then moving into the startup world, it's like nobody thinks about security because we don't have the budget for it and everything's shoestring architecture and all of that. And then, decisions that could have been made early aren't made until later, and it's very painful. So to be able to start to even proactively architect, let alone implement that stuff early, I see tremendous value there.
Might as well bake the best practices in early, right?
You have to. It's the only way to do this. You can delay it, but then it becomes very apparent, very costly, And I think the trick is really to focus on the business need. There's a way to do security just for the sake of security. Like if you give a security person a budget, yeah, sure, they can burn it. But the really interesting piece and the piece that really just drives us is, can you focus on what matters? Can you focus on how security can be part of your go-to market engine and really use it as a market distinguisher, which leads to amazing outcomes like closing deals faster, closing deals in new regulated markets, maybe even leading to more attractive M&A terms. Sasha, welcome to the party.
Hi, guys.
Hello.
A little bit late. Hopefully not too late to the party.
Not at all. Not at all. Well, it's great to have you, Sasha. Stephen and Jacob here are the co-founders of Talbot West. I was sharing with them a little bit about YSecurity, but I think it's just a great opportunity for all of us to get to know each other. And these two, you're broadcasting from Salt Lake City, right?
That's correct.
Amazing. In terms of security, do you guys think of yourself as security people?
We are not security experts, so we do love to bring in people like yourselves for specific security stuff. There is obviously a strong overlap between all of this. And so, for example, Steve, this might be a good time to talk about one of our aerospace clients. What do you think that there is a strong security tie-in?
Yeah, I think, to answer your question, having spent decades at Oracle, secure by default, encrypting data at rest, data in transport, all of that, those concerns were always paramount. So I've always been security adjacent. I've run security related teams, but it's never been my focus, and spent most of my career trying to steer clear of, say, public sector and a lot of the federal security regulations, stay away from FedRAMP, all of that. But, Jacob here has sucked me into some of these large digital transformation contracts for a company that does a lot of high-tech aerospace contracting to the DoD. So, dusting off my knowledge of, CMMC level 2 compliance, secure enclaves, the ways that we need to help them see how they might have been saving some money by having these on-prem deployments, but really they need a FedRAMP certified GovCloud. So I can delve into security, but I would prefer to let experts handle it the same way as I could do my own taxes. But I think security expert or a tax expert will do it better than I would.
Yeah. And so with this particular aerospace client, for example, we're not exactly trying to solve their security issues. We're trying to shine a strong spotlight on the decision-making pathways, the dependencies and which ways those dependencies flow, and how all of this stuff ties together, because it turns into such a tangled rat's nest. And really our recommendation, I mean, we're making a variety of recommendations to them, but one is to engage a firm that's an expert in CMMC2 compliance and security issues. And we're kind of showing how a lot of their decisions are going to be gated by whether they're going to do a GovCloud or on-prem, et cetera, and just showcasing these forking pathways and dependencies to them, really not trying to conclusively answer those questions for them, but, convince them to hire the right people for that.
In general, there's a lot of moats, especially in the organizations that have been established for a very long time. And when I hear government, when I hear aerospace, I hear a lot of opportunities for improvements in the process itself. How do you guys see modern technology stack help to address some of the biggest moats that large organizations have today?
Why don't you take that one, Steve?
Sure. Well, I think the good news is today, with so much on-demand as a service, things that are already being certified in a FedRAMP environment, not as much of the legwork has to be done, say, internally by your own team as it used to. You can outsource a little bit more of it as long as you're careful to not run afoul of the regulations, which I think is, as you're alluding to, the huge opportunity comes from the onus of the huge amount of sometimes conflicting regulation that's there. So I think what we've found as a general rule is, instead of trying to reinvent the wheel, go out and figure out the best practices, see what other companies have done, see what other offerings are new to the market. Especially in the AI space, a lot of things around threat detection, whether you're going to have some of these packet sniffers running at different levels of your network and what's actually going to happen with that data, where is it going to be logged? There's stuff out there now that literally didn't exist a year ago. So hiring you guys, hiring us, hiring experts who live and breathe that every day makes people realize that there's solutions out there that they never even dreamed of.
Yeah, and I think part of Sasha's question, Sasha, correct me if I'm wrong, is just around the inefficiencies in these organizations. And this is government, this is private sector. The bigger the organization, the more inefficiency. And well, that's a big focus of ours, is helping to shine a light on that. And of course, you're never going to get it perfectly inefficient. On a large organization, if you can even move the needle 1 or 2 degrees, you're talking massive impact on bottom line and profitability and all of that. So we're just looking to showcase the ways in which AI and adjacent technologies, automations, different types of solutions can be brought to bear. And we look in a very holistic system of systems way, not just plugging an isolated solution in and thinking that's going to solve it. Because again, back to this idea of dependencies, you've got to map it. You got to showcase the impact of how this depends on that. You got to have your data sources right, address those at the root level and all of this. And so there's a lot of time spent on the evaluation part. And then once we have clear pathways established and can show ROI, it's, then let's move ahead with a specific initiative that solves a specific pain point now that we understand how it relates to all these other things.
I'm super curious. What do you think is the biggest inefficiency that you guys bump into maybe almost regularly or like clockwork? It's like the first thing that you look at that maybe, and maybe has that changed with the advent of AI?
Well, I think just spanning my entire career, the biggest inefficiencies we see as organizations tend to get larger are the growing pains that started from, well, we used to email an Excel spreadsheet back and forth, and now we kind of finally started to get our first like SaaS-based CRM, but then we outgrew that. And so it's the legacy processes that have not been updated, the technical debt that has come from previous implementations. And the older the company, the bigger it is. I mean, when we work with some of these large telecoms that have been around for like 70 years, it's like their internal system is like a web portal, the best technology that like 1992 had to offer. They're running backend, JSPs still, things like that. And those things combined with stagnated business processes create massive amounts of inefficiency that, sometimes they're still getting away with. And eventually it takes like actually breaking something before they're willing to look at it. Like if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Even if it's taking literally 100x the effort that like some of the modern AI systems that Jacob is helping these guys realize they need, there doesn't seem to be that motivation there until you really feel the pain.
We have a lot of entrepreneurs who listen to the show, and some of them are first-time founders, multiple-time founders, but there's always a question of like, do I have a co-founder? And how did I meet? And I'm super curious. How did you two meet?
We've been friends for a long time on a personal level before ever doing business together. And Steve's watched me build other businesses. And, then when I started Talbot West, he was very encouraging and watched from the sidelines and actually gave a lot of great advice. In fact, I credit him hugely for even the launch of Talbot West. And then when I eventually poached him to come over and join me as a co-founder, and then he brought his formidable technical expertise to bear. And of course, that's also a huge asset.
Yeah, I think, it was a formative experience for me. I'd been living the cushy corporate lifestyle at Oracle. I'd gone through everything there from starting as a developer into consulting, into product development, finally landing in sales engineering, and then even more towards the sales side, which, being tied closer to revenue at a big organization with huge margins. Got to run the developer innovations team there. And, that it felt like I'd made it. Is like I've got, a large team of people who I can apply to build MVPs for big Fortune 500 customers. And we don't actually have to see these things through to production or actually do the support on them. We can move on to another interesting project. Amazing. But when we started to see how stagnant Oracle was being when it came to AI, when everything else is really starting to take off, and this was starting like 6 years ago, I think, Jacob had been in parallel building all these businesses, which I was, frankly impressed with. And then trying out the startup ecosystem, like you guys are alluring to. One of my friends who went and managed a big team at Google and some of my other friends from Oracle, we kind of banded together and made some pretty incredible strides, even before ChatGPT 3 on some RAG-based architectures when it was new. But it quickly became apparent, wait, like SaaS isn't where it's at anymore. And the models to scale this are quickly turning into bespoke consulting for all of the big customers we're trying to sell into anyway, which is when, Jacob, meanwhile, is rising like a meteor, doing the exact type of consulting that I see is in demand from all of these customers. It was like, a hand and glove fit with his business acumen, his drive, the ways that he can kind of intuitively load a huge amount of context in his head, almost like an AI. Very impressive to me, being a nerd. And so I was happy to come in and help bolster the kind of technical chops and from the technical consulting side.
I'm super curious. When you look into the future as entrepreneurs and you're thinking about Talbot West, like what does success look like?
Yeah, and there's actually a future prediction, just for where we see AI going to, that I'd like to address as well while we're on the topic of predictions. But in terms of Talbot West, I would just like us to be a very well-established name in AI consulting, business process consulting, with successful side ventures. We're doing a hub and spokes model. So Talbot West is our core crucible where we refine ideas, learn what the market wants, and then we launch side projects out of that. It's kind of bypassing the whole product market fit thing, because we'll know if we're doing the same type of solution for multiple customers, we know what the market wants. And so we actually have a side project right now we're doing. It's called Biz Foresight, and it is an M&A advisory platform. And we'll probably end up launching several more of these, bringing on the right partners to do the right type of, lifting to get those going, so we're not spread too thin. And so that's really good. We're providing the technical architecture and expertise behind it, and have the right team in place for that. So that's a really fun project. We anticipate doing several more of those, but always keeping Talbot West as the core hub of all of this, because it's doing the market research, solving the pain points, and actually understanding the market and the customers. And it's very good to be in the trenches like that.
Well, that's incredible. When do you guys sleep? You're building another company on top of this?
It's all about the right team and delegation.
Yeah. Honestly, Jacob's being a little bit humble. We used to describe like Talbot West, the core business, the consulting. We had a term called escape velocity, which is reaching the right amount of contracts at the right amount of margin in order to essentially get past like the gravity that would pull us back down into the place that like orbit is happening almost naturally. And like we could take off from there to other directions. And even as he was reaching that, Jacob, who I like to describe as like a 10X or someone X, like usually that's used to describe developers, but for Jacob, it's just, he's had such a passion for work his whole life that he lives and breathes and eats this stuff. So frankly, I and our customers are amazed with the amount of work product that he puts out, and even like, an hour or two's worth of time. And I think to kind of answer your question about how we define success, it is that stable hub of Talbot West as a consulting with enough revenue that at the margins we have, it's more than self-sustaining, so that we can take flyers on these like lower percentage kind of pitches, but that could be home runs. And that we're already fortunate enough to build that honestly makes me on the technical side more confident than ever that this isn't just going to be another consulting company. Like we are going to build a business empire here. And it's pretty exciting.
You guys see a lot of different pain points that your partners have. And I'm sure that list of different pain points is huge. How do you sit down? How do you decide that this is the pain point for which we will create a solution, because no one else has created one?
I just want to highlight from, both decades in Oracle, meeting with Fortune 500 companies, and then into all of the consulting that we've done through Talbot West. It's like every customer, especially these big guys, they all think that they're a unique snowflake with their pain points. They're like, oh, you need to understand me. And I'm like, I've seen so many of you now. Like once I've seen 100 companies, and the 101st comes with their set of unique pain points. Yes, some of them are unique to you, and let's call those out. But a lot of these things that you think are unique to you are not actually unique to you. You're like literally like one of 8 different shapes. We can already kind of predict what some of those things are going to be, but then also sitting down with presence. And I think Jacob will speak to this to really get an accurate picture of that company and their pain points. And Jacob, maybe you want to talk about kind of some of the system and process we've developed to create this kind of snapshot of a customer that's deep in its understanding. It would not have been possible before AI came out.
Yeah. So, and that's all great to solve this exact issue, because a lot of these clients have 500 different directions they want to run, and all these different initiatives they've started around AI and maybe have, stalled out, initiatives they've thought about pursuing, all these different ways they can apply AI in their companies. And it's overwhelming, and they don't know what to do with all of the opportunities. And so we developed our own methodology around this. It's called APEX. That stands for AI Prioritization and Execution. And it essentially maps their entire business, all their systems and processes, and then it maps all the ways AI could be applied within that ecosystem, and it prioritizes them against 5 key metrics. I won't go over all 5, but it's things like, what's going to deliver the highest ROI, what's technically feasible, what's it going to cost. I mean, it's on our website, but after doing this evaluative process, and we do it in 3 rounds. So one round is more of a shallow dive across all these, ranking them across these 5 criteria. There's kind of almost a semifinal round where you have just a small handful, and out of that there's a clear winner, and you do a really deep dive on that and provide a pretty comprehensive roadmap on what that one would look like to implement, what it would drive in ROI and all that. And it's very obvious where you should start. And then you have your second round bench of, after you do your one, here's how these others, and they're tied together in a kind of stepping stone format, because this is another key differentiator of Talbot West is we don't look at problems and pain points and implementations in isolation. We actually have a thesis of where we think this is going. It's called our 2030 thesis. And we think that the industry and, businesses are moving toward more of an integrated total organizational intelligence, and that in the future that'll drive tremendous competitive advantage. You can imagine if data and insights are orchestrated across the entire organization, the level of efficiency and emergent capabilities that would deliver. And of course, we're a long ways from there because today the landscape is everything's very siloed, very fragmented. But we think it's going to move toward there, that competitive pressures and technological capabilities make that an inevitability. And so all of this is orchestrated with that in mind. Let's help you find a stepping stone that is going to get you a step closer to that future vision, and then another step, and these are going to start bolting together and creating something that starts looking a lot more like that. Over a few years' time, you can arrive at that. And we see ourselves as a quarterback to help companies get to that.
Love that. So you're stepping in, you're the quarterback, the field is changing, everything is changing. By 2030, we're going to have a very different landscape, and that change is going to be driven by AI.
Largely AI integrations, the ability to create data orchestration layers. I mean, it's not just AI; it's a lot of other things. But yeah, it's all converging on that. Whether or not the year 2030 is the exact right target, the point is companies that work with us are going to be much closer to that through working with us than they would have been on their own. And they'll be much more on track to be competitive a few years from now, when that is the big differentiator, whether or not you have this level of orchestration and coordination across your company.
Yeah, I think just to build on that for a second, the kind of total organizational intelligence that Jacob's building kind of these roadmaps for, that's a little farther in the future than some of the first steps. But the cool thing is we're seeing a preview of that with our own internal kind of AI-driven intelligence on our customers. So we're essentially using the latest cutting edge and our own research on top of neurosymbolic AI in order to create an internal picture that we use to get all of the information in one place about customers, and whether that's being fed from all meeting transcripts, technical documentation, everything else. We're creating our own natural language queryable kind of intelligence source on these customers. And Jacobs had what honestly was a pretty brilliant idea to kind of prop these up by what are the natural life cycles of most companies. So whether that's everything from quote to cash, or what is the business process involved, let's map that whole thing out and let's stand that up like a skeleton. And then we can use neurosymbolic AI to create a knowledge graph, to create framework that defines the attributes that we want to know about this company. And then we can use, the latest LLM technology that understands natural language to go through that piece by piece and kind of start putting meat on those bones. So even ahead of the total organizational intelligence vision, which honestly most companies probably won't get to for a couple of years, we're starting to see, eating our own dog food, organizational intelligence about our customers today.
How do you ensure that sustainable and continuous adoption of new technologies? Oftentimes, when a new tech shows up, there is a lot of hype, there is a lot of excitement, and there's initial bump in the adoption and investments, adoptions, and excitement. But then over time, it just stagnates over and things go back to normal, where we keep grinding through the old technology stack. We are okay with that unless it breaks, just like you guys mentioned earlier.
I'll address that in two ways. One, by road mapping and scoping it correctly, this whole Apex process. We're making sure we apply it to the right things. So this whole MIT report where only 95% of AI projects fail to see any meaningful ROI. I mean, we think that that's largely driven by improper scoping and lack of understanding the dependencies and all of the things required for a technical implementation to succeed. And we certainly see a much higher success rate than that with our clients. So I think part of that is just improper scoping. You're just trying to shallowly fit a solution in without understanding the landscape. And, then there's the human element. Are you properly training the people, doing your change management and all of that? And then the other piece of that is just there's such a frenzy right now over large language models and a fundamental misunderstanding of what their actual capabilities are and aren't. And, one of the things I'm doing right now is documenting a lot of the very specific categories of ways they just fail. And they do. And these ways are persistent across releases, leading me to believe that it's fundamentally structural to the way that these neural networks function. It's not something that they're going to throw more compute, more scaling laws at and outgrow it. And so I'm documenting these, and eventually we'll publish a paper that I think will be the most comprehensive sort of mapping of the different categories of error, logical, different types of errors that they make. And so a big piece of this is not falling into the large language model frenzy, properly scoping the right tool for the right task. Is this a task for a large language model? Is this a task for some type of machine learning solution? Is this an ensemble job where it's complex enough you decompose it into subtasks and you bring in multiple different capabilities and kind of orchestrate them together? And so I think that's a big part of it too, is not buying into the hype and actually steering clients correctly. And when I hear the sort of rhetoric that, people conflate large language model with AI, and they'll say all of these claims about AI, by which they mean a large language model, and then they're just claiming it can do all this stuff. I just roll my eyes, that's not serving clients. That's not steering them properly.
Yeah, I think something that, I really appreciate that Jacob is always bringing us back towards is kind of a middle of the road approach. Not overly pessimistic, not overly optimistic, but delivering our clients what we actually discern to be the state of the landscape today. And to answer your initial question, my own personal view is we're probably in the equivalent of, the .com boom and bust of the late 90s. I think especially around LLMs, I'm seeing those same patterns coming up, and that one was exciting because that was towards the beginning of my career and so much fun, even the bust. But I think LLMs being overly hyped, I even drank into the Kool-Aid. Like once that Transformer paper from Google came out in 2017, and all of a sudden we could translate like all sorts of languages almost immediately. And all of a sudden, like the machines they weren't just passing the Turing test, they were obliterating the Turing test. So like by those metrics, I'm like, maybe if we just throw more vectors at this thing, maybe if we just throw more scaling, it'll be like Moore's law. And like, and that was happening for a while back towards like GPT-2, GPT-3, 3.5. And so I was kind of thinking maybe we are going to get to a more generalized intelligence, like an AGI that could literally just, take a single sentence and like execute on tasks and actions reliably and be like more reliable than a human. And in some ways, in some limited cases, we are getting close to that. But the idea that LLMs specifically are going to be this artificial general intelligence, I think, that balloon has been deflated for me, at least. Jacob's helped me see that as well. But I think the counterpoint to that is there's a lot of other AI technologies that people are totally ignoring. The stuff that I did historically with Oracle back when we did fraud detection for major credit cards, or when we're doing predictive sales analytics, we weren't using any neural networks for any of that, but it was about like mapping with logic, a lot of different interdependencies and making predictions based on that, and like Bayesian inference algorithms. All of that stuff is ripe to be combined with the natural language of LLMs to be bigger than the sum of its parts. I will not be surprised to see a bust in the investment into just scaling LLMs in data centers and throwing more GPUs at these things. I think there is a lot of demand for it, but the idea that it will keep outperforming itself at the same scale that it has seems fanciful at this point. And honestly, like maybe this is just my own hope, but Jacob and I could use a breath of fresh air if the pace of AI development just stagnated for, let's say, 5 years. Awesome. We've got plenty of work to do and plenty of ways to implement the technologies that are currently available to help customers. Almost, when the landscape's shifting on a monthly basis, I think it's harder for companies to predict or start implementing. So that's about where I think we're at, is some amount of bust boom on LLMs, but actually tons of untapped potential in other fields of AI that nobody's talking about or hyping.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. So you don't subscribe at all to this idea that like AI is a flywheel. and it's going to keep on hitting and increasing its own velocity and increasing at an increasing rate, and it's just going to keep on.
I do subscribe to that idea to some degree, but I keep backing off of it, and I'm seeing the trend of backing off from it more and more. And some of it has been, I subscribe to it in the theory, like the theoretical idea of a machine that's smart enough to increase itself, and if you give it unlimited resources to improve itself and it becomes smarter than the human, then it will become a runaway and we can start talking singularity, basilic, all of that stuff. I don't disagree with those in theory. Then I look at the practical thing in front of us, which is the LLM, which is like an autocomplete engine of like, what's the next word that might sound like an answer? And honestly, it's frankly impressive how close their things that aren't actually answers come to being answers. But it's when Jacob and
when it's wrong.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. Like its hallucinations are convincing. But
Yes.
with Jacob and I actually pushing the envelopes on pushing their context windows, pushing them into more complicated things to try to ask them to hold at the same time, like the cracks around the edges and the little hallucinations turn into chasms. And I think where I'm going with this is if there is another revolutionary discovery in the AI field on the order magnitude or larger than, say, that transformer paper from Google I researched earlier, or some of the stuff that came out through DeepMind, then yes, like all of that stuff's back on the table. But I'm less and less convinced and or worried that LLMs are going to be the thing to get us there. And it plays out like even in my own coding, like using Claude Code or using Cursor, like these things are impressive. I can get 10 hours worth of coding done in 1 hour. I still have to play senior develop. It's like wrangling a drunk junior developer, but like it can do work really quickly. And if it's not the wrong work, and if it didn't hallucinate, then it's amazing. And so hugely productive. But the more that I ask it to do even like semi-complicated coding tasks and it falls on its face, no, I'm not worried about it like writing this like exceptionally better than human level code and improving itself yet. But let's get on again in a year and maybe I'll have updated my prediction.
There seems to be something inherent to the neural network archetype that is very kind of loose in its logical structure. And that's the best way I can describe it. A looseness that is both its strength and its undoing. It allows it to be very generalist and to make connections and do things that much more kind of rigid and brittle machine learning or AI technologies wouldn't be able to do. But at the same time, it's not very anchored or tethered to reality. Steve mentioned neurosymbolic AI earlier, and we think that's a potential path forward where using certain rigid ontological structures that anchor the neural network to a sense of reality, but then allow the neural network to still have the flexibility to be a generalist and to make these inferences and do all the things it does so well. And so we're exploring that as a potential path forward of essentially compensating for this looseness and tendency of the neural networks to just not be that great at like reality or, heavy data analysis or all of these things where they just fall on their face so much.
Yeah, that's a really interesting take. And I appreciate that. Seeing all of the change and all of that unfold like so quickly. You don't get into this like with all of your clients, right? This is sort of the properties of our underlying technology that's driving all of this change. But, with that appreciation of the fundamental technology, what do you think is the easiest win that you see for an organization to just be like, hey, I'm new at AI. I can see that there's a lot of change happening. I don't want to be left out. Where do I start? Where do I begin?
Two different answers. One is hire Talbot West to do our Apex process and we'll tell you your easiest win. But short of that, just start playing with ChatGPT, know where to use it, know where not to use it. ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, etc. This batch of, chat bots. There are amazing, easy efficiencies you can get by knowing how to create custom GPTs, leverage them properly for certain types of knowledge tasks, not putting sensitive data in them, et cetera, et cetera. And so using them in a very narrow scope way in a company, you can be up and running in, one day, provided your people know how to do it. And you can find all this stuff on YouTube. And we do have clients that they're like, hey, we don't want to have to learn this stuff. Come in and just help us learn ChatGPT really well. And so we can do that as well. Some of our engagements involve that, but yeah, that's a great one as long as you know the right application of these tools and you don't expect them. Some clients don't have a realistic expectation. They're like, help me make ChatGPT do this very complicated, data analysis thing and integrate with all these other things. Like, yeah, it's not going to do that.
So what if I'm a leader of an organization? Maybe I'm the CEO of an organization. I don't know. Maybe I have like 500 plus folks in this a late stage startup, and I know that people are starting to adopt AI. We don't have a formal program. They're using it. And, just to take the example of coding for a second, like maybe some people are using Augment code and other people are using Cursor, and then Windsurf. What just happened? That they get bought or whatever. How do you suggest like leadership approach AI adoption within their organization?
Yeah, so usually that's a comprehensive governance framework combined with an internal initiative to find the internal champions, find the tools that are working, consolidate on one set of tools, get everyone on board that one set of tools, work with the internal champions to kind of evangelize to everyone else, put a training program in place, etc. Do you want to say any more about that, Steve?
Yeah, I think, you guys are security guys. So I like drawing this trade-off that Jacob and I often say of like efficiency versus security in some ways. And the most secure thing that companies could do with AI is just not use it. But also you're going to trade off ton of wasted efficiency to not use it at all. And so how can you, through this governance policy, come up with, all right, as long as there's not PII or customer info, like don't trust these big guys that you click some box and says, don't train on my data, and somehow your data is not there. Like that's fanciful. But if it's not something that's going to break the bank, if it gets out anyway, like you can move into some big efficiencies quickly. But
I think, Steve, you're talking specifically about using large language models, public commercial large language models, because obviously there are a ton of AI solutions that everything you're saying doesn't apply because it can be completely private, on-prem, or secure cloud, right?
Absolutely. So yeah, I think with the distinguished that probably the quickest wins that a lot of these organizations can get is with the LLMs. And it is with finding a use case where quickly generating natural language text in a format that could be templatable and is relatively consistent could save hundreds of hours worth of work in half an hour. And especially if it's something where the amount of work to produce it is large, but the amount of work to review it is low, and you still have your expert humans reviewing it, like you can get 10x efficiency gains on these things. And that could look anything like creative writing exercise, marketing content, all the way up to like RFP proposals, understanding them, responding to them, getting that stuff double checked, in the legal field, contracts, law review, those sorts of things are ripe. And that's why you already see so many SaaS solutions popping up around those things.
I'm super curious. I mean, in the beginning of the show, we were talking about, you mentioned the defense space and the CMMC level 2. And my mind is just thinking here, in the healthcare space, we have HIPAA, we have high trust, we have all of these things. And I'm sure that all of the important work being done and companies being built and the innovation being experimented with in these other markets, regulated markets, also want to jump in and take advantage of all of the benefits that you can have with AI. And so if there's an unclear path forward, of how do you mash the regulations and the responsibilities that you take on as an organization for the data, for the types of like controls that are required to be successful in those regulated verticals with AI, like how do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, we have partnerships with different companies, and there are many solutions emerging to abstraction layers that take out all of that or mask it. Essentially, you just have to, again, understand what those regulations are, what those requirements are, and guide our clients or, help them deploy the right types of solutions. If those solutions aren't yet ready or haven't hit the market for a specific, sensitivity, then steering them away from that or guiding them toward an on-prem solution. I mean, there's a lot of ways it can go depending on the specifics of the situation.
Yeah, I think it's funny because, I spent a lot of my career at Oracle during the transition from on-prem to cloud, even with FedRAMP, Pub Cloud, all of that, even government moving to cloud. And in some ways, to answer your question, with like stuff like CMMC level 2 environments with like, say, a secure on-prem enclave, sometimes you actually buy yourself more flexibility than trying to find either SaaS provider or stuff that can be hosted in the cloud that meets that regulation. So you can actually, I don't want to say get away with a lot, but how kind of onerous these regulations are. And if the regulations are mainly about creating a secure enclave within your on-prem environment, and you're able to deploy an on-prem version of something like a risk management platform that might not need a bunch of touch points to other things, that is acceptable under the regulation to deploy on premise, whereas the SaaS solution of that may not be able to be deployed. And it might not make sense from a logical standpoint, but I've given up on trying to figure out the reason behind a lot of these onerous federal regulations and just try to advise clients on what they're allowed to do that will be most useful to them.
I'm torn because it feels like we just moved everything into the cloud, and now the answer of like, how do we get it to be more secure?
Well,
Sometimes.
let me be clear. There's almost nothing that I would recommend that an enterprise client who's not subject to secure federal regulations would run in their own on-prem environment. The security of your hosted private cloud is going to be far better than anything you're doing on-prem. So it's asinine, in my opinion, especially for some of these smaller companies, that somehow that ends up being a path forward. But when the federal government and regulations are involved, sometimes things get backward.
I hear you. I've seen that once or twice myself. I'm super curious. What's been the most challenging day for both of you as an entrepreneur?
Do you have anything there, Steve? I love every day, so it's a hard one for me to answer.
Right? Jacob eats, lives, and breathes this stuff. Like sometimes he'll get knocked down, but it's just like an opportunity to go get more stuff. I think for me, the most challenging times have been when I thought technically I was onto a like new revolutionary architecture, which like occasionally now with some of the, new ways that things are out with unstructured data and using natural language, there are opportunities like some of our products he was talking about for this other kind of side venture we started, Biz Foresight, I do think are revolutionary kind of architectures and technologies. And that's so much fun. I get so much value out of that, like as a programmer. But the downside to that is when I think that something's going to work really well, and then, it seems like just a rat's nest of bugs I need to sort out. But as I start going down that rat's nest, it's like, oh, wait a second. There's a fundamental philosophical problem with doing this whole thing unstructured and in natural language. And it's not just, we just need a better LLM or a better machine learning algorithm. It's like, this is fundamentally not going to work. And I know that's part of exploring and pushing the envelope. And, Jacob reassures me that like we're trying to do research here. So like sometimes stuff's not going to work out, but it can get really frustrating to me if I thought we were right on the cusp of something and then like I have to go a totally different direction.
Yeah, I thought for me, what it would be, this hasn't actually happened, but this is what would be like the worst day, is if a client was totally unhappy. If for any reason a client didn't have like an amazing outcome, I think that I would personally have a hard time with that. And I realized to a level that's not, totally psychologically healthy. I need to disconnect myself from that. But I do feel like this strong commitment to that.
Well, I mean, It sounds like you're a true partner. Well, we've talked a little bit about the future, and I'm very curious, if you had the opportunity to meet your younger self, would you take that opportunity? And if you would you have any advice for yourself?
That's a great question. I think if I could go back to like all of the younger versions of myself, it would be mainly a message of like compassion and acceptance of like, it might be hard now, but like, it's all going to be okay. And a lot of the things that you're catastrophizing or worried about are going to work out.
Yeah, that's a beautiful message.
I think I'd do similar. I think in addition to having a lot of compassion for myself and the challenges I was going through, it would be a message of put myself first a lot sooner. Don't put up with other people's BS and let their agendas run my life, and actually make that decision way sooner to do what's right for me. And that would have actually set me up a lot better.
No, that's amazing. I really appreciate that. You guys make a great team. Thank you so much for joining on our show today. And thank you for all of our listeners for tuning in to another episode of the Security Podcast of Silicon Valley.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, appreciate it. It's been lovely talking to you guys today.
Thank you, guys. Absolute pleasure.
Huge thank you. I'm your host, John McLaughlin. I was joined with the other host, Sasha Sinkovich, and this has been a YSecurity production. One last thing before you go. Think about who you were 20 minutes ago. Maybe security's been that thing that's on your roadmap. That thing that you'll get to right after the next sprint, the thing that you'll get to after the raise or after something. But here's the truth. SOC 2 and ISO, these things are not just checkbox, they're keys. It unlocks enterprise deals. It opens up regulated industries. It's the difference between selling to a 10-person startup and closing Fortune 500s. That's where YSecurity comes in. We don't just advise, we build. SOC 2, ISO, done right the first time. 40 plus engineers from Apple, Uber, Microsoft, Robinhood, Brex. This is not guesswork for us. This is all we do. And maybe you're not the one who needs this, but you know a founder who does. The one trying to break into bigger markets, the one doing the 0 to 1 thing. Send them our way. We have an awesome referral program. We pay for introductions that turn into partnerships. So head to ysecurity.io/startups. The first 8 hours are free. 40 engineers, 1 full working day entirely on us. YSecurity has your back. See you in the next episode.